Hey, deserving listeners, Love is Blind. Let's check it out.
For you two to meet finally.
Yes, that will be great. I am looking forward to that as well.
Perfect.
I'm on the road.
Are you?
Yeah, I'm in Phoenix right now, kiddo. So,
Oh,
yeah.
nice. Sounds about.
So I'm obviously reading into it, but with Alex, there are a number of hypotheses available to us, and I've explored a few of them. And one of them involves the possibility of a certain amount of distance, not like pathological levels, but moderate, mild levels of distance and lack of attunement in his early childhood. I can't know that, of course. It's very silly for me to assume that. I'm not assuming that. But when I'm watching the interactions between the individual, like Alex, and his parents, his mom on the phone, I am really paying attention. Now, this is a weird situation. The mom is being called on the phone. She's probably been informed that they're filming. So there seems to be a bit of awkwardness there. I don't know, but it would be natural to have that. Plus, it's quite a shock to be called and you're being told that he's engaged. You might have some skepticism about that, like, what? Like, reality? So there's a lot of things here, but there does seem, of the sort of reactions that are available or possible from a parent being informed over the phone that your child is engaged now, this is on the end of the spectrum that is subdued and maybe not fully appreciating what's happening, right? Now, I don't need everyone to be like, oh my God, this is blah, blah, blah. But it's, if that's over here, which would be also within the range of what I would expect, this is at the other end. What does that mean? I don't know, but I'm paying attention to it.
Within the next few months, the Scottsdale, Phoenix area is one option, as well as Florida. So that's ironic you're down there already.
Very nice. Well, I started a new job, so
Oh.
But yeah, lots happened since we last met.
So again, just reading into it, but we're hearing that he didn't know that she was starting a new job. Not that every adult child needs to know everything, but it's just a tick in that column that they don't talk very often or that they don't share very often. And there's also more talk of what she's going through, which is fine. But if my kid told me they were engaged, like, all I'd be doing is like, oh my God, like, I wouldn't, at least under normal circumstances, I would just have so many questions and I'd be like, how does it feel? And what's going on? And, Ashley, tell me, like, who are you? Like, we got an enthusiasm, care, something like that. Now, again, I'm just reading into it. There's awkwardness, and it is tempting to extrapolate from that the mother is like a jerk face or something. That isn't necessary and isn't the most likely scenario. The more likely scenario is that there's a transgenerational pattern of lack of emotional dependency within the family, and that it's a stretch to speculate this, but it is something that I wonder if Alex was raised with a fair amount of distance, not necessarily abusive, but emotional distance, lack of attunement, lack of contact, lack of interacting in an emotional way throughout his life and when he was very young. And parents that have that parenting style with their kids, typically that's how they were raised as well. So it just goes back through the generations. There are cultural aspects as well that different areas of the world, because the United States has a lot of immigrants, most people are, and so depending on where you immigrated from, like in Europe, I don't know where his ancestors come from, but Northwestern Europe is, characterized going back many generations as having a colder style of parenting and family on average, not all families, of course, but that is the understanding among people that observe differences between cultural groups. Anyway, so I say that about that.
Aww.
Always good to hear from mom. Always good to hear from
She
mom.
seems crazy. Like she's just like on the road and like,
Yeah,
I'm starting a new
This
job.
is my life, right? Where it's like, oh, you started a new job. Had no idea.
Yeah.
Didn't know she's even applying, so. Or that she's in Arizona.
Should have been like, give us some tips.
Yeah. So a couple more ticks in that column. It's not a slam dunk indicator of distance, and it is a far cry from that to extrapolate to Alex's early childhood and the dynamic or the quality of the attunement. So, but we just had like 5 ticks in the column in a short amount of time.
Besides, obviously, my family.
Yeah. Are you worried about anything, or are you excited?
I've never lived with a woman before, so like your clutter and stuff.
Yeah, but
Like even like shoes here, socks here.
Now, full disclosure, Stacy and I are almost exactly the same when it comes to cleanliness level and clutter level, meaning that we're both pretty organized and pretty clean and don't leave things around. But that's us. Not everyone has to be that way, of course. So if we're talking about tolerance of clutter and dirtiness, I'm more in line with Mike in the way that he talks anyway. I don't know if Emma is super messy or something, so I'll establish that up front. Having said all that, the amount of times that Mike talks about his aversion to clutter and the amount of times he is criticizing Emma about this, they're just moving into their place, and everything he's saying revolves around that. And they just moved in, and he's already criticizing her. Or, I mean, they were in a hotel room together for a few days, so maybe he's worried about that or something. But the amount of focus that he has on that is interesting. Now, we could talk about actual OCD. We could talk about phobias. We could talk about some kind of trauma he has about being unclean. He said something earlier that before he didn't have his shit together and he was messy. That's the first time I've heard that from him. And then once he got his shit together, now he is very clean. So I wonder if there's some kind of trauma or some kind of trouble he went through in the past, and he associates all of what happened back then, like chaos and whatever he's referring to, if he is referring to anything. And he thinks I have to be very regimented. I have to be very on my game regarding organization, or else everything will fall apart and I'll go back to that old life and all of those bad things will happen, even though they're not really related. You know what I mean? Anyway, but at the very least, regardless of messiness versus cleanliness, the way he is talking with her, and really in the very beginning when he was talking about this, it felt off-putting to me. You know, there's a way to talk with someone of like, and we've seen various different versions of this, you know, and there's a range of what I would consider to be promising manners of communicating about this, but this feels outside of it. The way that he approaches it, he feels pre-resentful, pre-angry, pre-judgy, the way he talks about it, it's like he's sure that he's right, she's wrong, that she's just a disaster all the time, like, you know. And maybe we haven't seen what that exactly means, but I can't imagine that if I knew what sort of messiness she was, I can't imagine that his approach and his tone would be justified. So it's interesting, right? Now, there's also something called obsessive compulsive personality disorder, which is completely different from obsessive compulsive disorder. And I'll reiterate once again that people in society right now will say, oh my God, I'm so OCD, when they don't have OCD, they're just kind of particular, or they're kind of clean or something. And just, you know, you can say you're obsessive, you could say you're compulsive, you might even be able to say you're obsessive compulsive. But if you're going to say obsessive compulsive disorder, then you are talking about one of the worst conditions a human could ever have. Obsessive compulsive disorder is one of the worst things anyone could ever suffer from. It is life ruining OCD. Anyway, so don't say OCD, just say obsessive or compulsive. Disorder completely different thing.
I'm sure I have many quirks.
No, okay.
sure.
One thing I actually noticed in Cabo is you don't close any doors.
Yeah, so the closet, the one closet, I mean, there's only one.
No, it was both of them, both sides. Right, we have our quirks.
Well, yeah, those are my shirts. I mean, those are my whatever.
Okay. We can use it as a jumping off point. We observe that as he is communicating to her that he doesn't like that she's messy or whatever, and she is smiling and says, yeah, we both have our quirks. She's not saying you're right or I'm sorry or anything like that. He doesn't really call for that, but she's not defending. She's not denying. Then she offers her side and says, the message is, I don't like it when you leave doors open. And then he gets defensive. So I don't know what this means. I don't know if it's a pattern. I don't know the landscape. Maybe he has a right to be defensive and she doesn't. I don't know. But you can think about it for yourself. If it's, I say this a lot at the beginning of if it's one thing that you take away from my videos, it should be this. And this is one of those things. There's several things that are the one thing that you should take away. That is to be able to recognize defensiveness. That you should be able to recognize defensiveness from you. Sometimes defensiveness is called for. Sometimes you're okay with it. There's different degrees of it. But you should be able to identify, I am being defensive right now. And then you should be able to differentiate and have some meta understanding of, should I be defending myself right now? Or if I am defending myself, what else should I be saying around that defensiveness? If I were a birdie on a shoulder, I would say, but you just got done criticizing her and she is now saying, well, we both have our quirks. Why would she be doing that? Well, it's possible she's doing it because she feels attacked and it's been going on a lot. And so that's one. Number two is she didn't defend herself when you were saying she was messy all the time, which she might be justified doing. So you should not be defending yourself and just denying what she's saying. This isn't a good pattern. Even if she's wrong, which is possible, I guess, it's not a good start to a relationship. So just say, oh, I didn't know that. Or, yeah, I have a problem with that. I don't know, let's talk about that. Like, doors, what do you mean? Like, what is it about that? But, like, don't act like a child. That's wrong of me to say. Can you tell I have resentment about that sort of thing? I can get defensive. Everyone is. But it's a complete relationship killer to always defend or to 90% of the time become defensive when you're given feedback. Even if the other person is, so this is what I tell people is like, even if the other person is wrong, it's still not helpful, depending on the situation. I say that, and I tell this to myself, that most of the time when there's tension between me and my wife or me and someone else, in the moment, and maybe soon after, I will be confident that I am right and the other person is wrong. With enough self-reflection and therapy and repetition, a week later, sometimes it takes me a while to recover, I will look back and see I'm at least 50% wrong. So I have learned that when I think I'm right or when I know I'm right, there's a pretty good chance that I'm at least 50%, if not 90% wrong. That's a little tip. If it's one thing that you learn from me, it is to assume that when you're having, so for him he probably thinks, well, I'm right. She's messy and leaving doors open, that's not a big deal. If you can stop and say, there's a pretty good chance that she's right and that I'm wrong in this moment. It doesn't feel that way, but there's a chance, especially if you're trying to have a good relationship. It doesn't hurt to consider that maybe the criticism or the tension or the fight or something is at least half your fault. It doesn't hurt to assume that, unless you're being abused, which is a completely different scenario.
Yeah, but you just close the door after you're done with it. Tomato. Yeah. Different quirks.
Right. I suspect that Emma is bringing this up as a way to defend against the onslaught of criticism that he has been. It's in the edit, so maybe it's only 0.1% of the time, but the way his tone and the certainty and the sort of focus And it seems bigger than that. It seems bigger than just messiness, because he also says something earlier that once they were done putting stuff away, they were like, okay, it's Miller time. And he says, see, if we get our stuff out of the way, then we can relax. Like, okay, Dad, you know? So there's something going on there. I'm pretty sure of that. I don't know, but I'm pretty sure. So she only brought up the doors, I think, because she wants to say, hey, will you tamp it down a little bit? Because if you have your complaints against me, I could say stuff against you. This is not a good sign. This is, you know, if you're ever in that scenario, and it's a frequent scenario to be in, where you're like, well, you did that yesterday. If you hear yourself saying that, this is a dysfunctional conversation. It doesn't mean you're wrong. It just be able to recognize, like, we are not having a functional conversation. We don't have a pattern, or in this moment, we are not exhibiting functional, constructive communication. If you're ever in that scenario where you're tit for tatting, or you're remembering, well, last week you did the same thing, like, if you're ever there, or you hear that from someone else, recognize that if you just naturally react to that, like, the relationship is potentially doomed because hurt, accusation, rigidity, digging in, resentment, breakup.
Different
We'll
quirks.
figure it out.
So we'll figure it
I'll
out.
make sure to close my doors.
I'll make sure to try to pick up my shit.
Compromise.
Compromise. Look at us already doing it.
Okay, so that went okay on paper, but he scoffed at it. He's like, okay, I'll close my doors. Pff. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it was hard to see because we didn't see his face, but that's what I heard. He's like, okay, fine, I'll close the doors. Not a good sign. Those problems usually get worse without intervention, without couple therapy.
Can you believe we're getting married in 3 weeks? Are you excited?
I'm excited.
Legally bound.
Yeah.
Interesting. I don't know what I was thinking was going to happen, but I am surprised that the two of them are still together and are in bed together and seemingly having eye contact and affection. So maybe, you know, it was just the grief he was going, you know, I am publishing my book on grief soon. I understand how profound grief can be and how we don't allow people to have it, and we will shame people, and people shame themselves. So maybe it was grief, and he was a completely different person at the getaway. And now that there's been room for that, he is somewhat recovered enough, because, you know, I'm guessing when we have a loss like that, typically we're grieving the rest of our lives. It's just a matter of intensity and different waves over time, you know, anniversary kind of stuff. But anyway, so it's not like the grief is over in all likelihood, but maybe enough of it has been processed for him to be able to return to his regular self like he was in the pods, and the two of them will live happily ever after. Somehow I doubt it, but maybe. All right, well, that does it for that episode. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself, because you deserve it. You really, really, really do.